10. We took a month off last month, and now we're just getting back into things. Roger could not be with us at this meeting. I believe he's doing a little bit of traveling, and he's out of the office. He's going to try to break into the call at some point, but as of now, he's just kind of on the run. In any event, today we have a discussion with Monty Chapin from Graphisoft, who's going to discuss open collaboration in BIM from the Graphisoft approach. Monty is Graphisoft's North American business process leader, and in talking to him for a couple of minutes before the call, he's got some really interesting ideas and some really interesting concepts to share with us. Right now, everybody is in listen-only mode, so everybody is muted. If we do have any questions at any time, just raise your hand, and Rob, I believe you'll be able to unmute them.
I should be able to, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I am not actually showing the ability to see questions, only chat, so I can't really manage them. I'm listed as a Okay, great. Now it looks like I'm able to see it. Thank you, Rob. So yeah, welcome to the next next round of meetings, if you will. It seems as though we're going to be taking summers off and then starting back in September and running through. But nevertheless, after Monty talks with us, I'd like to, if we have time, discuss some next meeting topics, some ideas that people might have. We want to talk a little bit more about the implementation of OmniClass, what's happening with IFD, and kind of get a confirmation of when the next meeting is. So before we get started, like I said, if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand and we can unmute you. Alternately, you can just type a question into the box and we can field it for you. And that is pretty much it. We're just, getting the ball rolling for the fall after a summer hiatus. So I have nothing else. Rob, if you have any housekeeping items from CSI to share, we can go through those. If not, I think I'm ready to turn this over to Monty.
No, I think we're all set here.
Fantastic, Monty, take it away.
All right. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Let me show my screen here for you. Okay. All right. Seeing this?
Yep.
All right. Well, I appreciate the opportunity Roger extended to me to present to you all this morning. This is a presentation I actually did this Tuesday in Vancouver for BIM Forum Group. BIM and the integrated design process and strategies for collaborating across disciplines. As mentioned, my name is Monty Chapin. I'm currently a business process leader for Graphisoft North America operations. A little bit about my background. I've been in the practice, the business for 30 years this summer. I actually came across this company and this program in 1990, 91 when I came back from flight school. I was actually taking a sabbatical to actually go out of the field. But I came back after a commercial license and went back immediately, have lunch with an architect, and he asked me to come back, and we discovered this program, and I never looked back. It was actually a life-altering event. So for those of you that are not aware of Graphisoft, we're a global company. We're coming up on our 30th year of near development for the application ArchiCAD. It's been with BIM from the get-go, or what we called virtual building simulation. But we're global, 102 countries, 25 localized versions, language. We're under the Nemetschek's AG group, so we're headquartered in Budapest, but the main headquarters is in Germany. We're also cross-platform. We still remain the only cross-platform BIM application, both Mac and PC. So with that, the focus of today, what I'm going to really talk about is about 5 components, BIM and the paradigm shift that equals, some of the strategies and issues that are going on, mainly exchange and interoperability, particularly using IFC. That's mainly my role at Graphisoft North America, is heading up the exchange and interoperability, IPD, standards, protocols, and workflow. And some examples of what Graphisoft is doing currently to address these as an industry-wide need and solutions. All right, so with that, in the early days, we just dealt with lines and fills and text. And it was really about creating the base drawings and managing the reference drawings. And in the old days, for those of you that were old-timers, that was on the paper. But today, that moved to the digital format with the exchange of DWGs or DXFs and those kinds of things. But obviously, we sit kind of at a crossroad where BIM equals a new kind of paradigm shift, and it's affecting almost every aspect of everyone's business across the entire AEC industry. But particularly with that, it's new opportunities also. And I just, to this day, 20 years later, after discovering this BIM and what it had, it's really indicative of just some absolutely exciting things that are still just unfolding in front of us before our very eyes. And mainly that's collaboration, communication, coordination, and control. And I think that BIM really brings some phenomenal aspects to things that have kind of been lost, essentially, perhaps in the digital age of CAD, of managing just voluminous bits of data. And now it's coming back to a place where we have kind of some unique things and opportunities in front of us. But it also represents some very phenomenal new challenges. And that's one, particularly, of interoperability. And this has been raising its ugly head, but it's out there. The screenshot that I'm showing currently right now is of the latest release of ArchiCAD, and what you're seeing right here is I have referenced in a Tekla model of the bar bends and plates and steel that was generated in Tekla. It's brought into ArchiCAD. Now, for those of you, it's a little bit grainy, I'm sure, in this picture, but some of you may see something that may jump out at you. Let me zoom in a little closer. There's anchor bolts, in particular in this case, embed bolts on the columns that are extending out beyond the rebar cage and, frankly, the face of the concrete in this condition. Now, you may ask yourself, well, why would I want to bring in the bar bends, that kind of level of detail, into my architectural design intent model? And one of the reasons is just the phenomenal coordination and control that come from these kinds of aspects of seeing this information. It literally jumps out at you. So a top-down view, you can obviously, as these bar bins come into ArchiCAD, there are two along this entire edge of the embed bolts that are literally hanging outside the face of the concrete. So where we're all at is, any of us engaging BIM today, we're all probably emerging into this thing called the exchange. And the exchange is obviously causing a lot of frustration and in terms of how we're working with each other within the AEC community. But the reason that it's also kind of in a way frustrating for everybody is that what the reality is that it's how every vendor is kind of approaching how we're going through these exchanges of data and information. Obviously, we still all have DXFs and DWGs and DGN capabilities to export the files. But really, how do we come to a strategy where it's a more seamless environment for the end user? So some of the strategies that are in play right now by all of the vendors are direct interfaces, single platform strategies, and a common language strategy. So kind of the aspects of some of these are direct interfaces. One of the aspects is it's usually an API. It's almost always focused purely on the data exchange, and it has a very optimized workflow. Another strategy is what single platform strategy. It tends to be very, very vertically integrated as a solution to the end user. It's very proprietary in its file format and exchange, and it's almost always in a native communication language within the application. And out there also is the common language. And obviously the big one out there that the Building Smart Alliance International and local chapters have been addressing is the IFC, or the Industry Foundation Classes. And what's the phenomenal potential of this is, one, it's open, it's non-proprietary in its model format, it's mature, and it's vendor neutral, and it is an international standard, a STEP standard file. So IFC, Industry Foundation Classes. It's actually the mode, Graphisoft was an early adopter in the mode of exchange of IFCs as an open, neutral exchange format, and we became the early adopters of this. It's actually just in the last 12 to 18 months, maybe 24 at the most, that it's really become out there in front brain for many of the users of BIM applications. So with IFC, it means really simply this: it's a universal communication platform for the exchange of model-based collaboration and coordination data and information. So the real question is out there is, how can any one solution really maximize that value for the end customer or the user? Well, it's actually a very complex answer, and it relies on the fact that we work in an extremely diverse world today. And these lines are even starting to meld even more with global collaborations and workforces. So within this diverse world, it's really a matter of, does a single platform solution really address the needs of being able to communicate and collaborate with all these disparate parts across this very diverse world within the AEC? So another question that leads to that is, really, can designers and engineers really center on any one product or any one family of solutions that have the ability to move through that? And we think that unless the organization tends to be large and tends to be sometimes in-house or has a very deep knowledge base of that, the actual answer is probably no. That they really need to collaborate across these wide range of disciplines. We call it actual horizontality or horizontal relationships. Obviously, with each application, we do have a very vertical nature to the way we've approached some of our application work. But also, we feel that the strength of the relationships is really more phenomenal out horizontally across what any one BIM application is. And so for that reason, we think that the diverse collaboration or interoperability actually brings to each of the end users a very, very great advantage. And that being mainly that you're allowing the user to work with other users who have adopted or have addressed or are using their own best-in-class solutions that work across from local standards and communities. And it's fluid, it's more organic in terms of its approach in the BIM workflow. So that we believe, in this case, professionals use the solutions that are most accommodative to what's being achieved in their environment and the workflow that they're trying to achieve. And this really brings trust and I think, a higher level of communication to the world. I also think it brings a new level of performance and a new standard of care in terms of how we approach these new worlds and new opportunities. So a really big question becomes this: as you move out and you answer, you look at these things, how can you combine the benefits of what's going on in the vendor community, single platform strategies, more direct connections, with the ability to get across this very, very huge vertical pool of expertise in this very diverse world we work at? Well, again, it's kind of a complex answer out there, but there are a lot of things that are going on. And one of the main things out there that we've been trying to look at and address is the IPD, or the integrated project delivery aspect of that. You've all seen this. This is a very familiar curve now, the McLeany curve. And basically what we're describing here is the red line is the ability to affect change as the phases of design move across time. The yellow line is the costs associated with the change. They increase over time as the phases move. The blue line, or the purple in this case, however you're seeing this, represents the traditional 2D CAD processes. And the green line represents really the new curve of what we call pushing the design curve forward with BIM workflow and processes. But what's really phenomenal about BIM and the potential of it, as I was talking about, those new opportunities, is that sweet spot that exists in that ability in pushing the curve forward to affect change early on with minimal costs. You're well under the line of the red line descending to affect change at those early stages in design phases. And you're well above the ability, the line, the yellow line, the costs associated with making those changes. And that's the sweet spot that we continue to look at as a vendor developing our program. How do we help the AEC community engage that sweet spot earlier on, engaging more than just the architects and perhaps the engineers, but also possibly bringing the subs and the trades into conversations at that early stage. So with that, the aspects of this, I'm sure most of you know this, the integrated project delivery has been spearheaded AIA National and the AGC through their BIM Forum initiatives. A big component of that is some chapters like the AIA California Council has contributed, particularly the model progression specification and level of detail. Graphisoft had an early hand in some of that in the early days of what became VICO, what was constructor and estimator in the level of detail as that moved forward in these last few years. So, along with that,
hey, Monty, but we had a question. Do you mind fielding questions as we go, or would you rather hold them until the end?
I don't have a problem.
Okay, because Brian Lightheart has a question on expanding how the Tekla model was brought into the ArchiCAD model.
Yeah, it was brought via IFC, optimized run, which I'm going to come up to shortly.
Okay, let me just go ahead and unmute. Brian, are you there? Brian? Yeah, I have him unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine now.
Okay, I had my mic off. That is exactly the kind of answer I was looking for.
Yeah, it's an IFC, optimized IFC run between the two.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you didn't have to have anything else you wanted to expand upon with that, Brian.
No, that's fine.
Okay, great. Thank you for the question. And Monty, if you want to keep going.
Okay. Okay, well, along with the IPD, there's a bunch of standards and protocols and workflow processes that are emerging within the AEC marketplace. Some of those standards, obviously, are the Uniformat and the Omni class that's being spearheaded both in the North American market through the CSI and the Canadian specifiers, as well as things that are emerging out of the UK. Those are issues and initiatives that we're looking at and closely and starting to adopt as we look at what these strategies are going forward. Additionally to that, as I mentioned, Graphisoft being an early adopter of IFC, there are obviously a huge amount of initiatives that are starting to come around this, both in the North American market. For example, the concept design BIM that's being initiated by the GSA currently. The COBE initiatives by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are examples of that. So with regard to IFC, there's implementation processes going on within the vendors as they're talking and exchanging ideas and information with each other, negotiating these exchange processes. The information delivery manuals are starting, for those of you that may be aware of that, are being written. And the model view definitions of these exchanges of property sets and data and information are being coordinated. Along with that, this is all emerging and combining into the National BIM Standard, or the MBIMS, as it's being called. And an example of that, some of the things, this is just a screenshot of some of the layering strategies, Graphisoft and ArchiCAD still use layers within the ArchiCAD environment. But we're organizing now, starting to organize the building information now. Bigger part is the layer strategy is around Uniformat, threading in things like level of detail, those 100 through 500 exchanges, things like the IPD, the phases of design, as it also associates itself with level of detail, and some aspects of the National CAD standard that are still appropriate in terms of information as it's exchanged across the wide vast array of the AEC industry. Another example of that, this may be a little difficult to see, but we have users within zone tags that are now scripting in, for instance, in this case, Omni class table 13 spaces by function, so that the tags are now taking and populating Omni class information so that that can be populated in the exchange. So workflow. Some of these workflow issues really are emerging now as important aspects of it. I have this rule. It's mine. It's non-scientific. It's not out there. I call it the 10-40-50 rule. Basically what I'm saying here is that really in the way that I've seen BIM implemented in firms and organizations and companies, BIM, the technology itself, is really about 10% of the equation. The technology that you center on, what you choose or who you choose as your foundation for making your offerings and value proposition, that's a small aspect of really what's going on. The two larger aspects of it really, the 40% represents the actual implementation of the technology, and those workflows and processes that really come from that. And the remaining part of that really is a cultural aspect to changing technology, the mindset shift that has to go on when you change the actual technology itself, in this case BIM, or when you change the processes and workflow that go with it. So many times we see firms that try to lace the technology and the workflow over the top of old traditional 2D CAD processes. And that's usually a setup for, if not a failure, a very disastrous implementation of BIM. So I really feel that the cultural aspect, the change aspect of that is really about 50% of the equation when a group of individuals in an organization come together and decide to take those on initiatives of new technology and workflow. So it really comes down to one thing. Ultimately, the primary process is in the interest of the designers, and really effectively creating a seamless workflow in which any software application is going to work. With that regard, it becomes really critical in terms of how workflow from a round-tripping perspective really starts to emerge, and how those responsibilities and those aspects of divvying up the work, so to speak, become really complementary to the iterative processes that go on in design. The flow back and forth of information, how do you cycle through that? Obviously with BIM today, we are creating voluminous amounts of data and information. It's even more difficult to manage this information than it was from the reference drawing days of traditional CAD. So with these bits and pieces of disparate information now even coming from custom-built, special-built, purpose-built BIM models, how do we get this information now to communicate with each other in a more referenced fashion where these iterative processes of design are coming? Again, back to that forward part sweet spot in that McLeany curve of bringing all these entities together to have these rich, valuable conversations early on in the design. So with that, Graphisoft has been thinking about this for quite some time, not only thinking about it, but actually working around it. Just briefly, a little divergence here. In March of 2004, the AI Large Firm Roundtable actually wrote an open letter to the BIM vendor community. They highlighted 8 points that they felt were critical to the implementation of large, complex BIM projects within larger firms. Graphisoft actually came back from that letter, and through about 1.2 million lines of new code, almost 100,000 hours of man-hours in product design, we actually came back to this in the version of ArchiCAD 13. Basically what the letter said was this: these large, complex project files are becoming very cumbersome, and essentially what they're doing is that to move these files back and forth, file sharing essentially protocols, we're actually locking other users out of the process as these things synced back and forth. So technology was actually limiting the potential of the collaboration that BIM promised. So we came back at it last year, 2009, AIA National in San Francisco. We introduced the latest version of 13, and we really re-implemented TeamWorks environment, TeamWorks 1, which we introduced in 1995 in version 5.1. We came back along with that and the Graphisoft BIM server and introduced a whole new way of looking at how teams are going to collaborate and function with each other across these very complex data sets. And so we felt it was not only an evolution of the process, but really a revolution in terms of how communication and teams would collaborate across not only local area offices and local offices, but across the web, globally across the world. And really what it means is what we looked at was, well, how do we go from a 100 megabyte file down to element transformations or element control down to that 100 KB in size. So with regard to the TeamWorks environment and the BIM server, essentially what we did was we created a new component of the BIM server called the Delta Serve technology. Delta is in the mathematical equation of change. What it essentially does is the database now, and that's really what we did, was we changed the architecture so that the BIM model represents a fully relational database of information. And essentially what you're doing in this regard, taking a 100 megabyte file and moving it into the server environment so that you're managing simply the changes of the model as they affect the central file. And really all that meant was that we went from that 100 megabyte file to element transformation, and it really was a 1,000-fold decrease in network traffic. What it essentially did over on the right-hand side of the screen is allows now a user anywhere in the world on basically a DSL connection to work almost in real time with the rest of the team, whether local office or across countries or continents. And that, of course, depending on the latency and the fidelity of the connection, was a phenomenal revolution in terms of how we worked going forward. So we see ArchiCAD kind of placing itself now as a BIM integrator tool. The owner of the architectural data, being able to coordinate with the other disciplines, exchanging and referencing this information into a model set, visualizing it, detecting the collisions, coordinating, and change management. So this year, at 2010, at a national in Miami, Graphisoft also came back at this, taking IFCs actually to a new level, and what we're calling open design collaboration between architects and engineers in the latest release of ArchiCAD 14. And so what it really means in a nutshell, ArchiCAD being able to get out to such a wide, vast array of applications, and there's even more beyond this out on that circle of applications within the architectural, energy, MEP, structural solutions. How do we get to these solutions in an open format in this diverse world, this open collaborative world where best-in-class solutions are also working outside? And it really comes down to a new level of interoperability for us, the way that we saw this. So we actually re-architected the IFC environment within ArchiCAD, took it to a new level. The ability to integrate with the engineering teams across disciplines. And it based on the IFC protocol, moving forward, taking it to a new high level, the current exchange being IFC 2x3. So with regard to that, and coming forward, the current product portfolio is ArchiCAD 14. We have an MEP modeler that's a very vertical application, works within the ArchiCAD environment, the Eco Designer for early energy analysis, the Virtual Building Explorer, but more importantly, 2 slides ago, all of those applications that reside out there, MEP, structural, and energy solutions, exchanged via the IFC environment.
We have a question coming from Brian Trimble.
Yes.
Brian, I've just unmuted you, so can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, if you wanted to field your question, I just wanted you to be able to clarify which point you were asking,
Sure.
whether it was unique or not.
Yeah, Monty, I have a question for you about some of the other BIM vendors. Do they have that whole interoperability between the BIM server and all the users, or is just ArchiCAD all by themselves? And then if the other ones don't, will they eventually have something like you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm glad you asked that question. The answer currently is no. Right now it's currently limited to ArchiCAD users. But obviously you can kind of see with the pathway, with what the BIM server capabilities are, and with what we're doing with IFC, that pathway moving forward eventually is opening that up, that database. So right now the hooks into the database are currently limited by ArchiCAD end user to end user. But the strategy going forward as we move out, the hooks to the data will open up.
Great.
Okay.
And that's not tied up by you guys. You don't have a patent on that, right? I mean, that's something everybody can use?
It's currently to Graphisoft. No, it's currently within our own format. It's not an open standard that I'm aware of.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the one thing the one thing that I would say, I mean, or the question that I have is, how is this different from the use of something like Revit DB Link to manage the information remotely versus, or even the way that a central file works, Revit central file, where you can check the file out?
Well, I'm obviously not familiar with Revit DB Link, so I couldn't speak to that. But essentially, what it works is that what happens is when a ArchiCAD model is initially saved to the server. By the way, each copy of ArchiCAD has the technology in it. You're not buying a separate component of that. Every ArchiCAD client has the BIM server in it. The reason for that is it actually gives the end user great flexibility. For instance, you could go into a design charrette meeting in a conference room, and a laptop could act as a BIM server for that shredded team. But what it does is it pushes the file into a central place. Once the users connect to that, and we give them a very granular control over roles and responsibilities and access to that BIM file, they draw down one copy of that central file. So you have one upload that's fairly large, one download that's very large. From that, the DeltaServe technology manages the changes to the elements between the two files and synchronizes them. That's why you have KB transfers across the area networks or internet. So in a nutshell, the technology manages just the changes to the elements, to the central file and the local copy. And so that's how we're handling it in terms of the architecture of the database. Does it kind of answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Not at this point, so you can feel free to keep rolling.
Okay, so workflow examples. I'm kind of just going to step into what we're currently doing now with workflow with an ArchiCAD. So an example of that, an integrated workflow, structural workflow between ArchiCAD and some other structural applications. So there's really kind of 5 aspects of that structural workflow that go on. Number 1, the modeling itself, perhaps with the design intent. Number 2, filtering and classifying the elements that are going to be through the exchange, actually exporting the model, then referencing the model back in as the changes or information occurs, and then coordinating the model. So moving forward, kind of looking at that, say for instance using ArchiCAD 14, and maybe we want to go out to a modeling application or an analysis application or perhaps detailing. That medium of exchange through the center, that bidirectional, that iterative process is through IFC. So the model filtering and classification really takes a big leap. Some of the reasons that there's such great frustration currently in the industry with IFC exchanges is that more often than not, the information that's not relevant to the exchange kind of muddies the water in the exchange. And for instance, if you're exchanging information with a structural engineer, we often sometimes see users just dump the entire model into an IFC format and make the exchange. Then the structural engineer, for instance, has to go through and filter the information relevant to the work that they're going to perform or the responsibilities. So toilets and reflected ceilings and things like that that might not be appropriate to the engineer's work, maybe they shouldn't have been taken through the exchange. So ArchiCAD has addressed this. We've been addressing it for several versions now, where we have the ability to classify elements now as external, internal, load-bearing structural core components. So that ArchiCAD now starts to generate automatically through the way that you model and classify elements an ability to filter the information appropriate to the exchange. So if, for instance, I'm going from the architectural model and the architectural finishes and I go to the structural model, really all I want to give is the relevant data to the structural engineer, which is the load-bearing structural components of the building. And so you can see that ArchiCAD now starts to turn the information off. I don't have to do that through layer management. It actually filters the information based on the way that the properties have been set up. So it filters data. Going from that, the actual export itself is through a run of optimized translators. For instance, Nemetschek-Skia, a sister companion company of ours, which is a structural analysis tool emerging in North America, Allplan, or Tekla, or Autodesk Revit Structural, or any other local analysis software that may be optimized for an IFC run. So we've gone from into an environment where we had kind of a bit of a convoluted process of getting the information into an IFC format now to an environment where it's a one-click export. And you probably can't see that, but on the screen, optimized runs, in this case, a data exchange with VDS CAD from MEP or a Revit MEP exchange or a Tekla or a C exchange. So that those filters and those translators are now optimizing the IFC run to those other diverse applications out there. But more importantly, it's referencing this information together. I mentioned a little earlier that you're starting to see purpose-built BIM models out there and the real frustration in coordinating this information together. So for an example of that, the architectural model doesn't necessarily equal the structural model. But how do we bring these pieces together in an environment where they reference, where we can communicate from each of those, so that the structural model references itself against the architectural model? The example of that I showed early on was those anchor bolt embed plates and bolts that were hanging outside of the architectural model. We're starting to see that, visualize that, coordinate that. But we're doing that now in the way that we re-architected the IFC environment is now bringing in multiple IFC files and being able to version track within those. And setting within our environment, what we call the project reviewer environment, flagging conditions of, and not only conditions, but comments, streams of comments, so that the work is now tracking itself on these iterations of other cross-coordination and disciplines work within the architectural model. And simply what it means is that when these IFC models, the first one comes in, the second one comes in and references itself, we now start to see conditions where the column has been deleted, or it's been moved, or it's been actually deleted or modified in terms of its position or something about it. It's comparing essentially the GUID of elements that have now been brought into these versions or references of the IFC file. And that's essentially in a nutshell what it does. We've also, as I talked about, more optimized runs in terms of direct access back and forth. An example of that is Graphisoft developed a couple of plugins for the AutoCAD MEP world to bring data back and forth between AutoCAD MEP and ArchiCAD, and a couple of plugins that we've developed for Revit Structural or Revit MEP to do similar things. So whether you're going from ArchiCAD to Revit or to Tekla, or, and I won't take the time to go through, but integrating into MEP systems like ArchiCAD to Revit MEP or DDS, you're now starting to see optimized information data sets and runs that are now opening up the IFC environment to allow other applications adopting the IFC protocol and specification to bring the data back and forth more or less seamlessly through two disparate applications or vendor applications out there. So what it really means moving forward, yes?
Well, we had another question. If you're coming into a summary, why don't you go through that, and then we could field this one.
Okay, very good. So in summary, what we're really trying to do in Graphisoft's perspective moving from here to the future is how we bring the best workflow solutions that follow the logic of what's going on with these interconnected disciplines. And so what we're working on and what we've centered on and where we're going and what we've continued to champion and will also champion in the future is the IFC platform. And that's the latest release of ArchiCAD has really taken the IFC, that interoperability, to a new plateau in terms of those abilities. So I leave with this. When you think of Graphisoft, hopefully you think of our innovation within regards to this. And I want to thank you for allowing me the time to present to you. If anyone's interested, a lot of these excerpts are from an AEC Viewpoints Article 43. I'll leave that up here for a moment, and we'll open it up to Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, Tom Pansing had a question. Tom, I just unmuted you if you wanted to field that, or I could field it for you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, Monty, Tom, and Phoenix.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good. This pertains to our previous kind of level of detail discussion when you talk about iterations of the model. Mm-hmm. What I'm seeing as maybe some possible ideas are that you actually have a level 1 model that's disposable, and then you build a level 2 model that's disposable, and then a level, you kind of, rather than a layering strategy that tries to encapsulate all of the levels of detail in one model, you kind of do a schematic design model, you do a DD model, and you do a CD model that corresponds directly with the AIA kind of delivery of services. So there's one idea is there's this BIM model corresponding in a level of detail way to phases in the architectural process.
Mm-hmm. That's one way. One of the other things that we've been looking at is not only every time lifting new information, but also how can, in terms of workflow and process, how, let's just say from moving from the generic to the specific as you add more detailed information. Now that information moves from a level 100 understanding to a level 200 understanding. So let's say that we had an 8-inch wall. We're not sure whether it's CMU yet or what it's going to be. At level 200, perhaps we have a better understanding. Yes, it is CMU. It's going to have a finish. It's going to have an interior finish. So maybe at that point, that understanding kind of just migrates it to level 200. So the data...
It's Bob. I mean, the one thing that gets me with that concept is that, you know, with building information modeling, as you look on that curve, certain product decisions are going to be made, or certain component decisions are going to be made earlier, but not all of them. So in that, you know, the whole concept of phases is really coming into a shift, where you're not really looking at it as okay, you have a schematic design that's disposable, and then you have a DD that's disposable, and then a CD that's disposable, and then bidding that you can use as a reference. It's more, it builds upon it based on the level of information that is it's on an arc. It's not staircased.
It's a continuum.
Exactly. So, information, certain architects may want to add certain information earlier and other information later.
Exactly.
And so to create a series of models that are, almost disposable, to me it seems like it might be a little bit problematic, only because there's an expectation that a certain level of information is completed at this point, and then another level of information is completed at that point, where at CD or at schematic design, you may have a whole bunch of information that's going in there, but at the end of DD, you may have some information that's still missing. So it's an ongoing process that I see, and an evolving process rather than a staircase.
That's exactly right. And when I go back to the IFC referencing, you're referencing in a model from, say, for instance, a structural engineer that's a continuum of work. They're not saving out a brand new model or creating a new model. That IFC represents the continuum of their work, where they may have moved a column, deleted, or did something else. And it's referencing itself against a continuum of the ArchiCAD model, or architectural model in this case, so that you're seeing this continual stream of information being brought into a integrated environment. And that's an important aspect of what you just said. It's a continuum of information being added and layered as the detail and understanding also becomes greater.
Well, my question on the screen pertains kind of to how the model transforms over time from, say, the layer is called A-wall that has just kind of a blob of, it's just 8 inches thick and that's all you know. But then it might become its studs at 16 inches on center with ½ inch on one side and maybe 3 layers of composite stuff on the outside. But what I'm starting to think about is creating a layering strategy that is component-based, that is the material-based delivery of the BIM model that can then tie directly to materials takeoffs, constructability, and lends itself to living through the construction process as a tool that can be inherited by the contractor.
Yeah.
No, and that's a great thing. Go ahead, Monty.
Yeah, so what a user would do in this case is if they, at an early conceptual design, a wall that's at level 100, in the next phase of the design, you would move that to the layer level 200, a better understanding, an A10 classification for it, or A1010 if you know more about that. You simply just move that element in terms of its layer name to its new understanding or level of detail.
I'm even suggesting, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say that it's sort of like you stage in from, let's take a window or let's take an opening, for instance. When you're first doing massing and conceptualization on a project, you have walls, floors, ceilings, roofs, and openings, and you may only know that it's a wall, a floor, and a roof, and an opening. You don't know whether it's a window or a door, and then that opening becomes that opening is that's a Division 8 opening, and then that Division 8 opening becomes an 085,000 window, and then the 085,400 plastic, 085,413 vinyl. So it becomes a progression, and the information associated with that level comes along with it. So if you have information that applies to all openings, it comes in. Information that applies to windows, it comes in at that point. Information that applies to plastic, and then further vinyl, and then even taking it further into, this is a vinyl window, vinyl casement window 3046, and then it carries in its salient attributes on performance, usage, life cycle assessment.
Mm-hmm.
What I was thinking though is, like, take the example of a wall. It's one object, but then as it moves through the process, it could become multiple objects. Rather than still being a wall, it can actually start to be subdivided rather than just copying it to a new level of detail layer. You actually disintegrate it into its component parts as your understanding grows, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it.
And then those parts then establish themselves on the layers particular to them, so that this idea that it's a level of detail layer goes away, and it's that generic information starts to inhabit specific information by going from general layers to specific layers.
Exactly.
Okay, I have a couple of questions that are coming in. Ken Huggins, let me unmute you here. Ken, can you hear me? Ken? All right. Well, Ken had a question. You showed a slide which indicated a strategy for organizing layers, extensions, and layer combinations according to uniformat and LOD. Does Graphisoft have white papers available on this and similar topics?
We're writing them currently right now. So,
okay.
Yeah, we're in the process of that.
There you have it. And we also have another one from Michael White. If I can... Michael White, there we are. Michael, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, if you want to field the question, is so does ArchiCAD have tools that are LOD, LOD1, LOD2?
My question is I don't have ArchiCAD, I have a program, but when I use specific parametric tools, which are great, sometimes they ask for like tons of information. If you're not used to it, you're overwhelmed. And I kept thinking that all the tools should be designed one palette, your LOD2 palette, so that when I'm working on stairs, I don't have to draw every single mixed thing across the stair. I can say stair LOD1 or LOD2, kind of block out a basic massing for the stair.
I missed part of the background noise, but I think what I heard was, does the object technology support more detail and from the manufacturer?
Yeah, I think I was able to I think I may have heard a little bit more than you did. It was kind of along the lines of when you refer to tools, are you talking about the components and objects that are used within the software, the different components? Are they based on LOD1, LOD2, so they have various levels of information?
Right. Currently, right now, those are starting to be threaded into the objects. That understanding of what an object may look at level 100. Perhaps it's just a block of equipment with clear area space around it. That's a very good question because I think it's relevant to what's going on. You see a lot of people scrambling to actually get the content, the actual content of something that's indicative of or representative of it. But perhaps at level 100. It's really, we know there's a block of information, it's taking up this space, I need to know the clear area, the minimal space to get around it. So yeah, we're starting to look at how do objects now morph themselves, moving from the generic to the specific, adding on more relevant data and information as we understand, as the project understands more. So it's a very good question, and yeah, it's starting to emerge, our understanding of how to bring that forward.
Hey, Michael, you're very, very muffled. We can barely hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. Got it now. Okay, how about now?
Much better.
There we go.
I'm sorry. Basically, so I'll give you an example. Like when I'm adding a window, right? Originally, you said we should just add an opening at the beginning. It's almost like my window palette. When I use it, it's like 8 inches long. It's huge. It's got all this information in it. It almost seems like it should have tabs on the top, like LOD1. And at that part, I just click that tab, and it just basically has the basic information, and it tags the opening as an LOD1. So I don't have to sit there and say, if I export it, this is an LOD1. And if I go on to LOD2, I get more information to add in, and then I have tab LO. So it's like they need to redesign the tool palettes or something like that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. You know, the one side of it, though, is that a part of the LOD is above and beyond the data that's associated with it, but the actual graphics. So that's where it gets tricky, because we're marrying attributed information with vector graphics to create an LOD, where, you know, LOD1 graphically, it may only be a hole in the wall. LOD2, it's, you know, it's showing that it gives you a basic idea that it's a window. And when you get all the way to LOD5, you know, you're showing, you know, you're showing the beaded panel that's
Right.
within the door in terms of graphics. And then the data, it goes from, you know, opening to you know, 30 by 46 beaded panel door with an STC of this and a fire rating of that.
Right.
So you have to look at it both ways. So it's not really, it's very difficult to manage a level of detail graphically without having multiple components that can fit the bill. So, you know, but on the same token, you know, this information is very much driven by real world components. So, you know, we're not talking about a, you know, in a conceptual sense, in a design sense, prior to bid, you may be talking about a, you know, a Geldwen door, but or excuse me, a, you know, just vendor neutral door. But in reality, it's, you know, you may be talking about a Geldwen door. And, you know, the expectation of a manufacturer to create, you know, 5 different pieces of graphics to represent those at different levels of detail becomes a bit ominous, and a bit more than could be expected.
Okay, I wasn't saying a vendor should provide this information. I was saying parametric tools inside the program. So you have Revit, I have Vectorworks, and there's Graphisoft there. So we all have our window tools, or we all have our door tools. We all have our stair tools. So that's all I was saying is when I open up those palettes to create a window inside the program, that, you know, there's tons of information there. It almost seems like it should be filtered out where it only draws an opening when that's all you need for now, because that's all you know, that there's an opening.
Well, I will say that Revit can handle that in a very, very minor fashion. Yeah. In one of two ways. They do have coarse, medium, and fine, you know, graphic representation, and then you also have the ability to control graphics. But the more on-off switches that you put into these components, the slower they perform. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Well, to the answer to that, also, within our parametric technology, what we call GDL, or geometric description language, we actually capture parameters of information for listing and labeling. For instance, let's say that door is like you described it; it's generic, but at some understanding in the process, it has become a Geldwen door of model number, of whatever, and so we've now in the parameter settings, you're capturing, inputting that data with that door, so that data and that data can be mapped or matrixed to an actual property set for an exchange to QTO, for instance, quantity takeoff. So we're actually we have that in our technology. We've always had that in the parametric technology by being able to script in more definite intelligence about what is that door, where did it come from, who's the manufacturer, what's the model number, what's the fire rating, those kinds of things. And then they can be mapped forward going anywhere you want with that information, either IFC or an XML environment.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, the capability is there. It's just a matter of, you know, just like content developers anywhere, it's getting content developers that can understand the principles of the different components and build them accordingly, so that, you know, at level 100 it's going to show this information, at level 200 it's going to show that information, and so on and so forth.
It's not just that, it's also even user input. But let me just back up just a second. That's also emerging through the IFD currently right now, and those conversations that are going on, that we're all agreeing, one, a jam is a jam is a jam across each application. We've all agreed to the dictionary, the nomenclature of what we're describing, and that's not currently uniform. So that's one aspect that's currently going on with that.
Well, right, and in addition to that, I mean, the whole LOD process, or the whole LOD concept, is still very ethereal. and there's nothing that really defines exactly what should be in a model at 100, 200, 300, and so on.
This is correct.
So, you know, until there's a set structure to say that here are the attributes that belong at 100, 200, and so on, I think a lot of people are going to be reticent about sticking their toe in the water to be the one that says, hey, I think this should be there.
That's very true. It needs to be vetted out.
Right.
And we're just barely starting these conversations in a way. We're
Yeah.
all putting our toe in the deep blue ocean with this.
Exactly. I mean, I've been working on you know, creating a similar, you know, type of property sets using the SPI property sets, and trying to figure out how best to integrate it with the LOD scheme. And you know, it's no easy task by any means.
But the great thing about it is the conversations are going on both through the Building Smart Alliance and their efforts and the CSI and others, so that we're not boiling the ocean, so to speak, that we are communicating, starting to get around this as a group. And so those things are going on. You know, it's slow, yes, but it's happening now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're absolutely right, and you know, this was a great topic. We're just coming up to the end of our hour, and you know, I just want to let me hand this back to Rob. Rob, do you still have the slides up on your screen?
Certainly do.
Okay, let me pass this back to you, Monty. I appreciate this this session. It was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And you know, just to finish up, if you could just go to the resources page. A little bit of contact information. You know, my email is up there. Roger's is up there. Rob and Monty's are up here. If you have any other follow-up questions, I'm sure Monty would be happy to field them. You know, it really gives you a new a new understanding and a new, you know, belief that other platforms can play well in the sandbox if IFC is you know, integrated appropriately. So with that, it looks like we have a couple final comments. Deb thought it was a fantastic presentation, and Brian thought another topic suggestion that we may want to think about for a following group is for CSI task teams doing some work of this nature. Brian, if you would like to send me an email regarding that, I'd be happy to follow up with you with respect to that, because we do have some tasks that are currently being worked on. And again, anybody who's interested in assisting in development of these you know, new and different areas of implementing BIM into new tasks, the concept of the role of the knowledge manager coming to the forefront. A lot of this plays into it, and you know, giving people the right tools for the job. Again, what we have to do is develop those tools, and you know, there's a few people that are working on it. We can't do it alone, and you know, we're always looking for some help. So again, I thank everybody for their time. You know, a big thanks to Monty. This was one of our best presentations yet, and we will see you. Rob, when is our next meeting? I believe it's October 18th. It's 22nd.
I think it's 22nd. Yep.
Yeah, October 22nd is going to be our next meeting. So we should be getting a session. We should be getting a note out to you as far as what the topic is going to be, and you know, some finalized information. So again, enjoy everybody's weekend, and we'll talk to everybody in a month. Thank you again, Monty.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate the time.
All right. Take care, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.